Welcome to the channel. In this video I'm going to be going over how to root your K1. Now the steps I'm going to outline here will probably apply to a K1 Max, but I do not have a K1 Max, so I can't guarantee that it's going to work. So just keep that in mind, but I'm fairly confident that it will, because I'm pretty sure the brains are pretty similar, if not exactly the same, between the two machines. Anyway, so before I get into it, I wanted to discuss a couple of things. First, when you root this machine and you install extra software on it, make changes to it, you're kind of locking yourself into the firmware that you have on the machine at that moment. Now, if Creality releases a new firmware, and this is whether you root or not, you really need to factory reset after you install that firmware. And this will prevent you from having any type of unknown issue pop up on your screen or cause problems. It's just good practice. Anyway, after you've rooted though, that factory reset is going to wipe out everything that you've done. So keep that in mind, you know, that when you root this machine, you're kind of locked in on that firmware, or you're going to have to do it again. You know, you'll have to root it again on the next firmware. You'll have to install all that stuff again, make all of those changes again. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, you know, if you're fairly versed in Klipper, redoing that install isn't going to take that long. It isn't that difficult to do. Running back through input shaping and running back through, you know, bed leveling and doing all of these things, pin tuning your hot end, all that, they don't take that long to do. So it's not a big deal if you're versed in it. If you've never really used Klipper before, it's something to think about. You know, again, it really depends on what your goals are. Anyway, with all that said, if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get on with how to actually do it. Okay, so first things first, we want to boot up our machine and let it get to this state. And then once here, we're going to click on our gear icon. Then we're going to scroll down from the System tab to Reset to Default. Make sure all of these items are checked, and then click on the Restore button. Confirm, say OK. And then the system is going to go through and do its thing, and it will reboot, and it'll come back up at the, you know, just like you just took it out of the box. It'll ask for, you know, what's the language you want to use, time zone, Wi-Fi password, all of those things. Go ahead and enter in all that information just like you were starting it up for the first time. When it comes to ask you if you want to do input shaping and if you want to do bed leveling, uncheck both of those boxes, because the results of that aren't really going to matter, because we're going to be doing them again anyway. But go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now that the machine's back up and we're back to our current state, let's click on the gear icon again, and then this time we're going to click on the root account information. Go ahead and check the box, and then we have to wait for our little countdown. Now, you know, let me just toss this out there. Make sure you read this and make sure you understand the damage that you can actually cause by going through this. If you've never messed with Klipper before in your life, this is your first printer, you might want to stay away from this. This might not be the thing that you're after. It is easy, you know, by going into the configuration files that we'll be doing later on, to really break things. So keep that in mind. Anyway, you should, once you hit OK, you should get a root account and password. Note those somewhere, and then just say OK, and then that's pretty much it. And now our printer is rooted. Next steps. So now that we have root enabled, now we need to actually log into the printer. Now you're going to do this through an SSH client. Now it doesn't matter if you're on Windows, Mac, you can be on your phone, you just need an SSH client. Windows has one built in, or at least Windows 10 and 11 does. So you just SSH space root at whatever the IP is for your machine. It might ask you to store the key for it and say yes. Then it's going to ask for password. Just enter in the password that you saw on the screen from the printer, and you should be greeted with a prompt. And now you're actually logged into the host of that printer. Now I'm going to put this command in the actual description, so just copy that out and then paste it in here. And what this will do is that one of the users of the Creality K1 forum created this wonderful little helper script, and you could go and download this script via the command that I just entered here. And then you need to chmod 700 installer.sh. That'll make that installer executable, and then we can actually run it by hitting ./installer.sh and then pressing enter, and you'll get the screen that you're looking at right here. Now from here we want to do an install, so we're going to hit 1, and then the menu's a little bit larger than my screen here, so we'll have to scroll up a little bit. But we're going to want to install Moonraker and Nginx. Nginx is the actual web server. So we'll install both of those. And then we're going to install Mainsail. Now you could install Fluid if you want, which would be number 2, but I'm going to install Mainsail, which is number 3. So let's hit 1 to install Moonraker first. And Moonraker is an API system that allows your Fluid or Mainsail to actually communicate with Klipper underneath. So it's an API layer. Go ahead and get that installed. We'll wait on it. I'll fast forward this for you. Okay, so now that we have that installed, we're going to go back and we're going to install our main GUI. So we can either do 2, 3, or both. I think both is a little too much, but you know, I would just pick one, but it's really personal preference. I happen to like Mainsail more than I like Fluid, but you know, install whichever you want. If you install Fluid, it's going to be on port 4408. If you install Mainsail, it'll be on port 4409. So pick whichever one you want, say yes, and then let it install. The install is actually a lot faster than it was for Moonraker and Nginx. And there we go, we're done. So now we're finished with this script pretty much. You can hit Q and then exit, and then we're going to be opening a web browser to get to our new front end for our printer. Okay, so now we're going to modify our bed mesh capabilities. We're going to change it from Lagrange, which is what it is by default, to bicubic. And if we look, we can see this is what our height map looks like right now. That's our current bed mesh in graphical form. And we need to go all the way down to machine and then find your printer config. And then we're going to go down to the bed mesh section, and we're going to add algorithm : bicubic, and then under that we're going to add bicubic _ tension 0.1. It should be just like you see on the screen right here. And then you're going to save this and restart. Okay, once your system is back up from that restart, we are going to go back to height map. Now, normally the way you would do this is you would click on the home button. This is home, all the axis, and then you click on calibrate, and it would go through a bed mesh. You know, it'd build a new bed mesh. Well, you don't want to do that with the K1, or probably with K1 Max, or even the K1C at this point. You have to do it a completely different way. So do not run it through this method, the normal way of doing it, hitting the home and then hitting calibrate. That isn't going to work properly. What we want to do is we got to go to our dashboard, go down to macros, and you're going to have a G29 macro down here. And there's a little drop down on it that you're going to want to hit. And then it's going to ask you, there's a couple of boxes you need to fill in. And you're going to need to answer, just a couple of questions on here. So you're going to need to put in the bed temperature, what you're normally printing at, and then the nozzle temperature. And for me, I normally print at 50 on the bed, and I normally have the extruder set to 200, or the nozzle set to 200. And then click go. Don't worry about the points, and just send. And then this is actually going to start building a bed mesh. And you should see, the control in the console, you should see the commands actually start to pass through it. You should hear your machine doing something at this point. It's going to home and do all of that stuff. And then it'll go through its normal steps to produce a bed mesh for you. I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through all this so you don't have to wait for all that to finish. And so, again, this is just the method that you have to go through from here on out in order to build a bed mesh. Because, going through the standard regular calibration that you do, it skips, it cleaning the nozzle and doing all that. And since the nozzle being clean is super important to getting a proper bed mesh, you want to add all that stuff in. So again, you need to go through this macro that they've created, or build your own if you want to. But all of that stuff needs to happen before you actually calibrate your bed mesh itself. Anyway, so the bed mesh should be done now. You should see on the screen Save Config show up. Go ahead and click that, and then it'll restart. And then when it comes back up, you should see that you have a better mesh at this point. And again, just remember, this is how you need to go through calibrating new bed meshes. Okay, so now we are going to do a PID tune on our nozzle. It's really simple to do. Now in 1.335, they modified the bed control to be waterfall versus PID. So we're not going to be doing a PID tune on the bed. But in order to do it for the nozzle, you just type PID _ calibrate, then a space, heater equals extruder, target equals whatever you normally print at. Whatever the main temperature you print at is. I normally print at 200. So that's what I'm going to put in here. And then press enter. Now at this point you should be able to see the nozzle temperature rising. And if you've never done a PID tune before, it's going to overshoot that. Then they'll adjust the temperature a little bit and let it drop down. Then it'll go back up, then it'll go down, then it'll go back up, so forth and so on. And what they're doing is they're trying to figure out the right amount of energy, if you will, to give the heater so that it reaches that temperature as quickly as possible, yet doesn't overshoot it too much. And then how little they can provide to keep it at that temperature. So it's, kind of trying to optimize the energy output. Now, like I said, we're not going to do the bed. Again, in this version of firmware 1.335, they changed it from PID, which is what it used to be, to watershed. And that's kind of like bang bang in Marlin speak. And now, you know, you can modify that if you want to. You can go into your printer CFG and you can change it back to PID if you wanted. And you could run a PID calibrate just like we did here, except heater would equal heated bed. But I don't really recommend you do that. Anyway, you should see save config now. I did speed mine up, so yours probably won't go as fast. But once the system restarts, you should be good to go and we can move on to our next step. Okay, so now we need to do our input shaping, but before we can do that, we actually need to go and edit the G-code macro config. And in here, we have to edit a setting because they're actually locking us to a specific algorithm for input shaping. So right here, you can see where it says EI, that's what we're locked to. So we want to comment this guy out. And then while we're in here, we're going to go ahead and change another setting. This doesn't really have any impact on what we're about to do, but if for whatever reason you were to run their input shaper, this will kind of help it out. So normally you run the shaper calibrate program, or you can do each axis individually, but if you want Klipper to automatically modify your config, you're going to run shaper calibrate. And for whatever reason, they have you locked to the y-axis only. So it's only going to find out what it is for y and then set that for x. So we want to change that so that it only runs shaper calibrate and not shaper calibrate axis equals y. We just have to find it first. There we go. So here in our input shapers macro, we want to change the line that says shaper calibrate axis equals y to just shaper calibrate. So we're going to get rid of that last parameter. All right, and then you're going to click save and restart. Okay, so now we're going to do our input shaping. Now we're not going to run the input shaper macro, but before we actually do this, what we want to do is we want to make sure that all of our fans are on, or at least the fans that we normally use are on. So, you know, if you don't use a parts cooling fan, you don't need to turn that one on, but we want the fans on that are normally going to run while we're printing. Now we want to just type shaper underscore calibrate in the console window. And that'll kick off the actual process. Now with this command, Klipper is actually going to write the results to the configuration file for us. So, you know, we don't need to do anything as far as that is concerned. However, we will have to figure out what our max acceleration can be. And as part of this, Klipper is going to recommend a maximum acceleration for that given algorithm on that given axis. But we'll get more into that when we actually get to it. Now this process itself is going to take a while. You know, it takes about 9 to 10 minutes to actually run the full thing. And I've sped up the process here, so you know, you don't have to sit and wait that long. However, you know, it still takes a little while, even through speeding it up. But again, once this runs, you can see here it's recommending certain speeds. Then we're going to have to do a little investigation and figure out what our max speed is. Okay, so now that we're done, we can see that it's telling us this is the algorithm that we're going to use on this given axis. So hold on, it's still figuring it out. And you can see that, you know, it's saying this is how fast you want to go for this algorithm, this is how fast you want to go for this one, this is the frequency, so forth and so on. Okay, so you can see here, this is saying this is what we recommend, which is ZV. Now we need to go back and search for the speed that it said for ZV. Okay, here we are, and it's telling us 12.3. So that's our maximum speed for the y-axis. So now let's find our x, and it's saying the same thing. We're going to use ZV. So let's scroll down until we find that line, and that is our maximum for x. Now since our x is higher than our y, we have to use y. You have to use the lower of the two, because you know you can't go higher than that 12.3 or else y is going to look messed up. But go ahead and save and restart, and then we'll move on. Okay, so now since we know what our max acceleration is, let's go ahead and modify it. So we want to go to our machine tab, and then we're going to edit our printer.cfg file. And then in here, we're going to go down to the printer section and modify max_excel to whatever our value is. Now for me, I'm going to set 1200. It said 12.3, but I'm not really worried about the 300. I'm just going to set it to 12,000. Now again, that's my value. Your value might be different. It might be a little higher, might be a little lower. You should land somewhere around here on the K1. If it's really low, you might want to check that you don't have any loose bolts or anything like that. Now the next line down is max excel to decel. We also want to modify it. Now, you can either comment it out and just use the default, or you can set it to half of whatever your max excel is. Mine I'm going to set to 6,000 because that's half of 12,000. And by default, if you comment it out, it's going to use half of that 12,000. But once you've modified those two, then save and restart, and we'll move on. All right, so now we need to set our rotational distance. Now I've got another video on figuring out rotational distance, so I'm not going to go into how to do it here, but we're going to edit our printer.cfg file, go down to our extruder subsection, and then we're going to set our rotational distance. Now for me, you know, the default is 6.9. For me, mine was 6.95, so it was really, really close, but just not quite on it. And I do recommend that you go and figure this out, because it will change your prints if it's off. Now, once you get that set and figured out, I want to make another change in here, and this is for whatever reason Creality decided to put pressure advance in your printer CFG file, and you don't want that here. That needs to go inside of your slicer at your filament settings, you know, for extra G code. And you want to set that, you know, for each filament, because it's going to be different. And having it inside of your config file basically says, if I'm not setting pressure advance, we'll go ahead and set it to this value, some random value. Yeah, and that's not a good thing to do. Anyway, go ahead and comment that out, and then click save and restart, and then we'll move on. Okay, so now if you have the Creality camera attached to your printer, it's really easy to get it to work inside of Mainsail. Go to your little gear icon and then scroll all the way down to the bottom. You're going to see the webcam icon. Click on it, and then just add webcam, and it should be there. You should already see it. You know, the system's going to pick it up automatically. Then you just give it a name, and that's pretty much it. That's really all there is to adding your webcam. It's really simple. So in conclusion here, I didn't spend a lot of time on the installer script, you know, the helper script. They've spent a lot of time developing this thing. It's a nice utility. It allows you to do lots of things. And you know, I keep the install to a minimum, you know, because I'm going to update when Creality releases a new firmware. But you might want to come in here and just check some of this other stuff out. You know, having better fan control, you know, some of the other options that you have, like adding time lapses actually to Moonraker so you can get it inside of Mainsail or Fluid. You know, keep in mind Creality software is going to do time lapses for you if you have a camera. So again, you don't really need that, but if you want to see it inside of Mainsail, you know, you can add all that support here. Lots of people want to get Octoprint added. You know, things like this is really kind of nice to be able to do. And this helper script will allow you to do all of that stuff. You know, like the improved shaper calibration, that adds the ability for you to create graphs off of the data that you produce when you go through your resonance tuning. And those graphs are super valuable, especially if you're trying to diagnose something. You know, just those little things. So it's nice to have. So, you know, go in here, check it out, see what you think about some of the stuff. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up this video for how to root your K1. I hope you got some use out of it. And, you know, like I said at the beginning of this might work for the K1 Max. It might work for the K1C. I don't know. I don't have either of those printers. But if you do and you try this, let us know in the comments how it actually worked out. And if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. If nothing else, please hit that like button because it helps me with the YouTube algorithms. So, as always, happy printing.